Today, we're diving into one of the most talked about topics of our time, economic inequality. But what's really going on behind the headlines and the big numbers? We're going to break down the key ideas, the problems you don't always hear about, and the really tough choices it forces us to make.
So let's kick things off with a question that might seem simple at first, but it's at the heart of this entire conversation. Is treating everyone exactly the same really the same as treating everyone fairly? Think about that for a second. And that question right there leads us straight to a really critical idea, the difference between equality and equity. Now, they sound almost the same, but in the world of economics, they mean two completely different things with huge implications for how we run our society.
Okay, so first, you've got economic equality. This is pretty straightforward. It's the principle of sameness. Just imagine a school that gives every single student the exact same amount of money for their school supplies. On the surface, that sounds fair, doesn't it? Everybody gets an equal slice.
But then, there's economic equity. This is all about fairness. It starts by admitting that, hey, not everyone is starting from the same place. Here's a good way to think about it. Giving every kid the same textbook is equality, but making sure there's a ramp so a student in a wheelchair can actually get into the library to use that textbook, that's equity. It's about giving people the specific tools they need to have a fair shot at the same outcome.
So when you put them side by side, the difference becomes super clear. Equality focuses on sameness, giving everyone the same thing. Equity, on the other hand, focuses on fairness, giving people what they need based on their unique situation to create a truly level playing field.
And this all points to a pretty powerful idea, which this quote just nails. If you really want a fair outcome for everyone, simply treating them all the same won't cut it. In fact, it can sometimes make things worse by ignoring the disadvantages people already have. The goal has to be justice, not just sameness.
Okay, so now that we've got that whole equality versus equity thing down, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's define the specific ways we actually talk about and measure this economic divide. First up is income inequality. Think of this as the money flowing in, your paycheck, your salary, any money you make from investments. When that flow of cash is spread out really unevenly across the population, it can start to weaken the bonds that hold society together.
And to get a real sense of what this looks like, check this out. In the US, between 1979 and 2022, the wages for the bottom 90% of workers went up by about 33%. Okay, just block that number in your head for a moment.
You got that number? Because in the exact same time frame, the wages for the tiny group at the very top, the top 0.1%, grew by over 344%. I mean, that gap is just wow. That's income inequality in a nutshell.
All right, next up is wealth inequality, and it's really important to get this. It's not the same as income. Wealth isn't about your monthly paycheck. It's about what you own. Your house, your stocks, your savings, minus any debts you have. It's your total net worth. And believe me, this is usually spread out even more unevenly than income.
And that brings us to poverty, which actually comes in two main flavors. You have absolute poverty, which is what we usually think of, not having the basic things you need to survive, like food and shelter. But then there's relative poverty. This means you might have your basic needs covered, but you're still falling way behind the average standard of living in your own country.
Okay, so we have all these definitions, right? Income, wealth, poverty. But how do we actually measure it all? Well, that's where things get really tricky. It's what's known as the measurement problem, and it makes you ask a pretty big question. Can we even trust the numbers we see?
The go-to tool for this is something called the Gemini coefficient. It's basically a score from 0 to 1. 0 means perfect equality, everyone has the exact same income. 1 means perfect inequality, one person has everything. It's a quick and dirty way to get a snapshot of how things are distributed in a country.
And you can see how it works right here. It lets you compare countries at a glance. So you can see South Africa has a really high Gini score, meaning high inequality, while a country like Sweden is on the lower end of the scale.
But, and this is a big but, does a single number ever really tell the whole story of something so incredibly complex? The short answer is, well, not even close.
Because the truth is, the data we use to get that number is full of holes. It often comes from surveys that people don't fill out accurately. It can be shaped by political agendas. And here's the biggest flaw of all. It almost always measures poverty at the household level. It just assumes that everyone living under one roof shares all the resources equally.
And that last point about assuming everything's shared equally in a household, that's not just a small detail. Get this.
Some estimates suggest that as much as 30% of all global inequality is completely hidden inside of households. That means our official numbers are almost certainly understating the real problem.
So, okay, the numbers are tricky, maybe even a little flawed, but we know inequality is a real thing, and it's probably even worse than we think, which brings us to the biggest questions of all. Why is this happening, and why should we even care?
Well, it turns out there's no single villain here. It's more like a tangled web of causes, all feeding each other. You've got unequal access to things like good schools, deep-seated discrimination, the massive shifts from globalization and new tech, and even how tax systems are designed. It's a whole mix of things.
And the consequences? Well, this is huge. For the longest time, you'd hear this idea that inequality was actually good for the economy. You know, the whole trickle-down theory. But a lot of modern research points in the complete opposite direction. It suggests that when most people feel like the game is rigged, they have less reason to work hard or get more education, and that can actually slow down economic growth for everyone.
And the fallout isn't just about money. It digs deep into the social fabric. High levels of inequality are linked to less trust between people, more extreme political division, and even higher crime rates. It can really start to pull a society apart at the seams. All right, so with a problem this big, with consequences this deep, you got to talk about solutions, right? So for our final section, let's open up the policy toolkit and see what's being debated.
And let me just say right up front, there are no silver bullets here. Every single solution comes with its own set of arguments and trade-offs. Take the minimum wage. One side says it pulls people out of poverty, the other says it kills jobs. The reality is often messy and somewhere in the middle. Same thing with a radical idea like universal basic income, or UBI. Will it free people up to start businesses or just make them stop working? Again, the early evidence is complex. Every potential fix has a push and a pull.
So what's the takeaway from all this? There's no single button we can press to fix everything. The real challenge isn't just about crunching numbers or picking the right policy. It's about asking ourselves a much bigger, much more fundamental question about the kind of world we want to live in. So how do we find that balance between creating a prosperous society and making sure that prosperity is shared fairly by everyone? That's the question we're all left to answer.